Welcome to the Future Media Podcast. I'm Ricky Sutton.
And I'm Alan Chappell. And this podcast goes deep into the collision of big tech
and the future of the world.
We explore how companies like Google, Meta, and Apple are impacting each of our lives.
I'm an investigative journalist.
I'm a privacy lawyer.
And every week we speak with experts to bring the unreported details into the light.
On December the 10th, Australia will drop the hammer and become the first country in the world to ban social media accounts for under 16s. All the major platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, Reddit, X and Threads, all of them are caught in the dragnet, and they face $15 million fines if they stuff it up. This is a first of its kind, and unsurprisingly, parents, pundits and puppets from right across the political and lobbyist spectrum are flooding the zone with a myriad of opinions. What's right, what's fair, what's best for kids, or just plain cruel for some young people. But one area where this is truly pioneering is that it shifts the responsibility from parents to put it squarely on the platforms. Now, this is not about parents having sleepless nights over what to allow anymore, or kids being trusted with doing the right thing when they're out of sight. This is about platforms being forced to take responsibility and pay a very heavy cost if they fail. And that creates a global precedent that's very scary for big tech. And it's also very scary for investors and the big end of town. That means the powerful are being challenged, and that would make many cower. But Australia's eSafety Commissioner, Julie Inman-Grant, is cut from a different cloth. She's proving herself to be a very tough cookie. She's already sparred with Musk, and she's worked inside big tech. She considered a career in the CIA, and her family has had a close run-in with one of the world's most notorious serial killers, Ted Bundy. Now she's blending those life experiences and her tech nous to call BS on what can and can't be done. And that started with one of the largest investigations ever and anywhere into how well modern technology can actually tell a child's age. Her conclusion is that the tech exists and it works, at least well enough. And it's high time that kids are protected, no question about that. But she's making it the responsibility of the tech giants, who make hundreds of billions of dollars from surveillance, and a lot of it from kids, to do that work. And Julie Inman-Grant joins us today to unpack how the biggest experiment in online safety and privacy in a generation is going to work in practice. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Amazing. So I noticed that just this morning, Meta began sending out notes to teens, warning them that these changes are coming in about 10 days. Snap's also announced some new safety measures. Insta's rapidly making changes as well. And all of this is happening just as in the US, the Meta's just won its case against the Federal Trade Commission to avoid being broken up there, which was a US initiative to limit big tech control. So there's a lot happening, but in fairness, right now, Australia and you are the epicenter. So can we begin here by you giving me a description of what this law is, what it addresses, why you're doing it, and how many kids you think are going to be affected?
Sure. Let me start by giving you a broader context for what the eSafety Commissioner is and does and where this fits into the scheme of things. We were set up in 2015 as the world's first online safety regulator. We were set up as the Children's eSafety Commissioner and started small with a cyberbullying scheme. And we are also the hotline for Australia. So we take reports of child sexual abuse material. Our scope has expanded quite a bit. So we have complaint schemes where we hear from members of the public about abuse they're experiencing, and we serve as that safety net, particularly when the platforms fail to act, when a child is being seriously cyberbullied, if there's image-based abuse, so the intimate images and sharing of intimate images, and that includes deepfakes, and we have a 98% success rate in terms of getting that down, adult cyber abuse, and we're dealing with a lot more graphic terrorism and violent content. Examples would be the recent Charlie Kirk assassination, the Charlotte student that was stabbed, and a beheading of a Dallas manager that was all over both Twitter or X and Meta. So we're dealing with that in real time. We've got systemic powers around codes and standards. So we're taking on nudifying sites and roulette sites that pair children with pedophiles. And we're taking a lot of action in the AI space. So we will, as of March, no AI companion or chatbot will be able to serve outputs or content that deals with pornography, violence, sexually explicit content, suicidal ideation, self-harm, or disordered eating. We do all that. That's kind of our protection. We have a huge prevention division where we're dealing with research and evidence and what we call co-design. So we're talking to children about what they need to know and want to hear in language that will resonate with them, for instance. And then we have a sort of unique division, and that's the proactive and systemic change. And this is where our Safety by Design initiative fits in, putting the burden or the onus back on the platforms themselves to assess harm and risk, build the safety protections in at the front end rather than retrofitting. I think most people would understand that is sort of akin to what was required almost 60 years ago by the US Congress and the Australian Parliament to embed seatbelts into cars. So I see this as the analogy to that. Why is technology exceptional? When we export in cars, we expect them to be built to Australian safety standards, and we expect access to that crash test dummy data. It's not the same with technology, and we think they need to have their seatbelt moment. But we also need to be an anticipatory regulator and be able to know what's coming down the track 18 months to 2 years later. To give you an example, in 2020, we put out a tech trends release on deepfakes. I couldn't get anyone in the mainstream media to pick it up. So timing is important, but what we were able to do, because we were thinking about how it might manifest, is ensure that the next version of our legislation covered synthetic generation of CSAM and TVEC, as well as deepfaked image-based abuse. So we have the tools today to deal with that. So all that said is looking at embedding safety in different ways through prevention, protection, and proactive change. Now, the social media minimum age bill is a very specific bill. It's an age restriction bill for social media. So it isn't an omnibus safety bill, but what it will require, and again, put the onus on the platforms to do, is to prevent any under 16-year-old Australian from having or holding a social media account. There are some exemptions, so it's not an absolute ban. We're referring to it as a social media delay. There are a couple of reasons for that. The whole idea is to keep children, as their prefrontal cortex is developing, they're developing their critical reasoning skills, the digital resilience skills, even their impulse control, is to keep them away from these harmful and deceptive design features that are baked into these social media platforms, to keep them scrolling, to keep them entrenched and entranced. So, powerful forces that they can't see, let alone fight against. But we don't want to cut off their digital lifelines either. So Parliament decided to create some exclusions or exemptions for messaging platforms, for online gaming platforms, and for anything dealing with education or mental health support and the like. So that is coming into force December 10th. I'm happy to talk through with you the how and how we've laid this out in our regulatory guidance in terms of what we expect the companies to do.
Everyone is talking, everybody's offering an opinion. It's very difficult to choose the wheat from the chaff and the honest from the dishonest or the influential. How are you managing to cut through the noise to get to the real mission here, number one? And also, I read somewhere there's 250 people in your unit. So this feels like it's a significant effort by the Australian government to make real global precedent and change.
Yeah, I mean, we've come a long way. When I walked through the door 9 years ago, there were 30 people and we were about a $10 million entity. We're now about 250, but believe it or not, we're small vis-a-vis, say, the European Commission, who's implementing the DSA, or even the UK's Ofcom, where they had double the people that we had before they even had legislation in place. So I'd like to think we're punching above our weight. And listen, it really is important to cut through and actually create the right set of expectations. So, I am hopeful and I'm optimistic that these changes, they'll create significant normative change. And I mentioned to you earlier that we refer to it as a social media delay because that also really reflects as parents how we talk to our kids, about technology use. We don't say, you're never going to have a phone, you're never going to be on social media. We'll say, I understand your friends are on it and you feel excluded because they're, using Snap Maps or Instagram to make plans, but you're not ready yet. And this kind of gives parents that backing to say, not only are you not supposed to be on the platform until you're 16 years old, your friends shouldn't either. So that kind of takes away that element of FOMO that I think parents are genuinely worried about. And when we did some research last year to kind of assess not only how many 13-year-olds were had a social media account, we found that 84% of 8 to 12-year-olds already had social media accounts. And in 80% of the cases, when we asked them, do your parents know about this? They said yes. And then we said, okay, if your parents knew about this, did they help you set it up? And in the vast majority of cases, the answer was yes. So I think there's a we're all conflicted as parents, and you and I are both in that sweet spot where we do worry about overuse of technology. We do worry about the harms that they might experience, but ultimately we don't want them to be left out. So this takes that away. And I think actually, while there will be some significant changes, and we have to acknowledge that the biggest transition will be for the young people who are between 13 and 15 now and are using social media, that will have that effectively taken away from them. Again, they'll still have messaging and gaming that they can turn to connect and, interpersonal interaction. Wow, what a concept. But I think it's going to be Generation Alpha that is going to have where it's going to have the most impact. The babies of today up until 12, maybe they will be growing up with more of a digital-free future without the expectation that they're going to be on social media or before. So I think the benefits will be long-term. What we are doing to make sure that we're really looking comprehensively about what the actual impacts are and gathering an evidence base, because there wasn't really one used in passing this legislation, is we've set up a independent evaluation. We're collecting all the baseline data now, and we're doing it with 11 of some of the most respected academics in Australia and around the globe. The Stanford Social Media Lab is our lead partner, but these are all people who are specialists in mental health and well-being and the intersection of technology. So we'll be looking at everything from, are kids actually getting more sleep? Is there less stress and tension in the household about device use? We'll be looking at NAPLAN. Are their test scores better? Are they actually getting out there and reading more books and playing more sports and interacting? Interestingly, what some of the schools found when the school phone bans, which we all have to acknowledge is an easier thing to do because you're banning or you're limiting the use of devices in a contained space, the school. But they've had to go out and buy new sporting equipment because kids aren't texting across the playground. They're actually playing.
Amazing. And so, look, all great change. Australia is proving itself to be quite good at driving change. We've had the news media bargaining code here that everybody paid attention to. Australia's really getting on the map here of having the courage to go first, but someone has to go first. And I think what you've said, if I'm shorthanding what you said, It won't be perfect on day one, and there will be things that we learn and there will be things that we evolve. But if you want to change something that's bad, you have to start somewhere. Is that a fair shorthand of what you said?
That is a fair shorthand. And like you said, I mean, we were pioneers in terms of even setting up an online safety regulator. And so for those first 7 years, I had to write the playbook as I went along because there were no guideposts. And I often talk about the whole idea of, riding your bike up Mount Ventoux and not having anyone drafting behind you and just getting all this sort of gravel and shrapnel in your face by being that pointy end of the spear. But other companies and countries are watching this closely. In 2022, when I saw that there was going to be a critical mass of other online safety regulators, we formed a group called the Global Online Safety Regulators Network, and my colleagues just met in Europe last week. So we're actually building a network of regulators. And, we have to, right? The internet doesn't stop at the border. It's a global entity. Almost all of my regulatory targets are based overseas. So, you can't be parochial about kind of sitting in an ivory tower here and not engaging, not cooperating, not collaborating, not learning from one another.
Amazing. Helping a child in your neighborhood, but helping children in the world feels like a very honorable mission. As I said earlier, I've tracked so many of these, and one of the things that I see, I try and decipher the big tech playbook, and I'm sure you do too. You can see similarities in the way it reacts to things like this, and they very adeptly sidestep responsibility by saying, this isn't really our job. We're just a platform. The parent's responsible here. And I can tell you that at the football field, every single weekend, there's a conversation about this amongst parents that feel terribly guilty about their children's usage. So for the platforms to say, oh, it's on the parents can look after it. But then when that doesn't work, the next thing they say, well, it's not our platform, it's all the platforms. So you're going to have to do everyone. Okay, so it's not just us. You need to do everyone. And that puts some people off. And then when that doesn't work, the third one is, oh, well, it's actually the responsibility of the app stores. So you're going to have to go to Google and you have to go to Apple because they're the biggest targets and the hardest. Exactly. Let me just point you over here because it's not me, it's them. And I've seen that happen again and again and again. But you're not allowing that this time. Do you take their protests? I've seen them do it today. There was actually quotes today from Facebook saying, this is an app store solution, should really be with them. And I'm like, oh yes, tick, page 16, 14C, exclude Z, right? So I've seen this. Do you take those protests as a sign you're doing the right thing?
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, I was in the tech industry as one of their first lobbyists in 1995, working for Microsoft. So I helped write that playbook. So when YouTube recently put out a study showing how much their creators on YouTube are generating for the economy, I remember during the Microsoft antitrust trial, we started working with economists that would create a well-written, well-reasoned narrative about why Microsoft wasn't a monopolist. So these tactics have been done. And what's really interesting about the Online Safety Act, and I credit both Paul Fletcher and Malcolm Turnbull, who were the architects of the Online Safety Act and who'd both worked in technology, they made sure that it's written into the legislation that the eSafety commissioner has to be someone who has experience in online safety, but also has significant standing in the internet and technology fields. Because they didn't, and I'm a bureaucrat, but they didn't want a bureaucrat who didn't understand how these companies thought, what kind of strategies they would bring, but to also understand what their limitations are. So I think when I'm asking them of things or I'm developing regulatory guidance, I knew intuitively, even though the government had done a very extensive age assurance technical trial, testing a range of technologies, and at least 10 out of 50 of them had a very high technical readiness level and were shown to be accurate and robust and effective and privacy preserving. Had I said, you need to use these specific technologies, the companies would have gone nuts. Because I shouldn't assume, well, one, I know that they all have proprietary technologies that they're using today. inference technologies, for instance. So they already know a lot about underage users today. They know a lot about us, so they can target us with deadly precision.
They specifically target children with some advertising, right? So they know who to target, right?
Yep, they know who to target, so they know a lot of this. Some of them will use third-party tools. But I thought it's not my job to pick winners and losers in the age assurance area. We've given them a whole bunch of evidence, so they can't say there are no solutions that work because we've shown that there are. But what I've asked them to do is to take a waterfall approach or a layered safety approach. Which means they can use their proprietary technologies, which are probably telling them a lot. They can supplement that with digital or government ID, but not only digital or government ID, or they can use a third party, already tested service to deliver, say, facial age estimation and liveness tests. But it's up to those companies. What I want to be able to see is that systemically that it's working and it's effective. And on December 10th, there's been meaningful effort to deactivate or remove under 16 accounts. And so I thought ahead. They're going to miss accounts. Things aren't going to magically disappear overnight. So company, you need to have a very discoverable, responsive user reporting scheme. I know there are lots of parents out there who are going to want to dob their kids in if their account isn't deleted by that time. I've also said, in case you overblock, you need to make sure that you have an appeals process there so that people have recourse. And the third thing I said was, we know VPNs are going to be an issue, so location-based circumvention, and we fully expect that teenagers are going to be creative enough to use generative AI or wear masks or highly realistic gaming graphics to try and spoof the age estimation systems. The burden is on you to prevent this circumvention, but also to report back on to us on. We want to see constant improvement. So what we saw today, and you mentioned Meta is doing exactly what we asked them and the other companies to do, is to communicate in a compassionate and kind way to under 16 users. They've identified that this is happening. And we know this is going to be a massive transition for some kids, but they keep sort of doing the apology around. It's such a novel age between 13 and 15. And 18 or 13, that would have been one thing. And so I wrote back to the chief online safety officer and I said, hey, I actually have confidence that the age inference technologies you've been using for years are highly effective. And you're using Yoti. And I just saw a post from Yoti CEO saying, we're getting better and better and better at identifying between those ages. And they're putting a new model out next week that'll be even more accurate. And so what we said was we expect continuous improvement. And I expect we don't expect perfection. But we expect you to use all of this data to continue improving your classifiers and your AI tools. This is not set and forget. This is, we want you not only deactivating, but you need to put the systems, technologies, and processes in place to prevent future those under 16 from setting up accounts.
100%. And so these are companies that have built their entire ethos on move fast and break things. You're asking them to move fast and break things and fix it as they go, which is what they should be good at. And so I think that's amazing. I did want to just ask this, though, because the tech guys, just the first thing I want to say is that I read all of your documentation, all your technical documentation and all of your implementation documentation yesterday. So I've read into a lot of this. I was very interested in, you mentioned it earlier on, the waterfall concept. So you can use certain technologies to use facial recognition or some version of something similar to identify the likelihood of this child being in this age bracket. But it's not perfect, but it's somewhere. And then if that's in a certain, tell me if I've got this right, if that's in a certain bracket of doubt, then it can waterfall to the next thing, and it can waterfall to the next thing. And there are inference and identification pieces. And I'm not sure this is a real picture. This might not be a real picture. And then it was like, as you get further and further and further and down the identification, you ask for more and more and more. And then eventually you get to a point where you think, or you have a very high probability that that person is of that age, and therefore you can make a decision. But as you said, there's an appeals process, but the appeals process lies with the tech platform, and they have to respond in a timely manner. I thought that was fascinating. But some of the things I really liked, because you've clearly given this a lot of thought, was, well, maybe we make an inference by the fact that this person is in a school every single day between 8:45 and 3:30. So that's a likelihood, isn't it? That's a trigger. These are all very, very clever and sophisticated. And again, by putting the onus on the tech company to say, well, you guys have built the technology that's created this. You seem to be highly effective in understanding who your audience are in 4,000 different demographic and cyclographic and biographic and every other possible graphic you could imagine. You seem to be good at that. But suddenly with children, it's the one you don't want to do. So I just want to say I thought that was very smart and I loved it. But all of this also comes with teeth. So there are teeth behind this, and it's very easy to leap to this and go, oh, they're going to get fined this number and it's going to be huge. But you do have to persuade them to come to the table, okay? So do you want to talk a little bit about the penalties? Because as you've said, it doesn't have to be perfect day one, but we are expecting there to be a measurable and accountable and provable benefit. So can you just explain that bit, please?
It's been an interesting process. And, after the law was passed, I started having conversations with senior leaders in all of these companies that we thought would be captured. It was a very quickly deliberated bill, as most people know. And so, and as the regulator, you have to work with the definitions and the legislation you're given. And so one of the challenges is that I wasn't given specific declaratory powers. But very few, we were pretty certain very few companies were going to self-assess and go, hi, I'm an age-restricted social media platform. So what we did was kind of off our own back, just so that there would be clarity, was create a self-assessment tool for the companies. And then we did our own legal assessment. And that's how we kind of arrived at the companies that we think are captured by the definition that was provided for in the legislation. And I've had to be at pains to sort of say, this isn't a safety bill. Well, no, it isn't. It's an age restriction bill. So, a lot of feedback that we assessed Roblox as being primarily an online gaming platform. That doesn't mean it's safer, but that's not what the legislation was designed to do. That's why we've used other tools in the toolkit, our codes and our standards, to start these negotiations with them. So by the end of the year, based on the threat of equally high fines of $49.5 million, Roblox has agreed to now protect every child's account at the highest level of privacy default. They will no longer allow adults to contact children without explicit parental consent, and they are going a step beyond, and they're doing age assurance, which they should be doing. But I guess that's my long way of saying, you don't use a wrench when you need a screwdriver, right? We've got a toolkit, and so just as we're asking the companies to engage in successive validation or this waterfall approach, we take a layered safety approach to everything that we do. But what we saw through this assessment process is what I would describe as a lot of shape shifting. So through our codes process, which have been underway since 2021, companies like YouTube and Snap, for instance, as well as Instagram and Facebook, identified as social media sites. When this came along, all of a sudden, Snap was a camera app, and then they were a pure messaging
I
app.
saw that too.
And
Yes.
YouTube was a video sharing platform, but much more like a streaming service, not a social media platform. And Pinterest was a visual search engine. So lots of and a lot of these didn't fall into the very narrow exceptions or exclusions. And so we went through this painstaking process to make sure that we understood what their sole or significant purpose was, and whether that was to encourage online social interaction, which is again is the language in the legislation that we need to work with. So, we have arrived at a place, and you've seen some companies have said, we don't agree that we're in, but we will comply. I expect that there are some that we've named that probably won't comply, and there's still a couple of weeks left. We could see a constitutional challenge to the law, or some of them could wait and do nothing, and then wait until I take enforcement action, and then try and challenge the law and eSafety on that basis.
I love that. So YouTube wasn't in, and then YouTube was in, right? So when I think about the platforms that children use a lot, just talk really quickly. I know we're short of time, but just tell me a little bit about why YouTube wasn't in and then it is in.
Well, there was a lot of back and forth during deliberation of the bill. YouTube was in, then they weren't in. And then when the final bill was tabled in Parliament, YouTube was given an exemption. And I thought TikTok said it the best way. And it was the first time I'd seen Snap, TikTok, and Meta actually aligned on something. But they said, banning social media, but not including YouTube, is like preventing or banning soft drinks, but allowing Coca-Cola to still be drunk. And of course, I looked at it in a slightly different way. I sort of looked at the fairness element. I was part of the legislation said that I had to put forward independent safety advice, which I did at the end of June, which was up to the new Minister of Communications to take or not. But one of the first things I said was, no company should be given a specific named exemption. And the primary reason for that is you could be what we would consider relatively safe today, but if you eviscerate all of your trust and safety personnel, or roll back your content moderation, or you're like the new Sora. You're creating this social app that with hyper-realistic AI video generation qualities without guardrails, you could be a very unsafe platform tomorrow. And so I just said, YouTube, in our view, and we did children's research that showed us that 75% of kids were experiencing harm on social media. And the highest proportion of kids experienced it on YouTube, 40%. And they do have opaque algorithms, and it is largely user-generated content. It isn't classified or moderated before. There is autoplay and endless scroll. So all of these things together, and same thing with Snap. Ephemeral media, Snap Maps, Snap Streaks, which is a gamification. It's a way to keep kids snapping. All of these things in their entirety do give them the characteristics that Parliament defined as a social media site.
Commissioner, I know you need to get back to your job because you have a lot on. I would imagine your calendar is looking quite busy. I just want to leave you with this, though, because it's an insight. I did a live podcast in front of an audience recently with Rod Sims, who is the architect of the News Media Bargaining Code, who bears many similarities to you, actually. I see a lot of similarities in you: courageous, determined, focused, not willing to be diverted by the noise. He said something really interesting to me. He said, whenever I see a tech company speaking about the challenges that they're facing from these kinds of changes, every quote uses the word, the enforcers are doing this, and the enforcer is asking for that. And I said, well, they are enforcers, aren't they? He said, no, what they're really afraid of is regulators, because enforcers enforce a law that exists and they've got no end of lawyers, and that's just fine. They know what the target is. With regulators, they're fighting a moving target and they don't know what to do or what that regulator is going to decide on next. I heard a little bit of that from you in that last statement. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's right. I've seen some of the, I won't name the platform, behave very badly, including hiring people to try and background conservative news media and the opposition to try and undermine my credibility I don't know if it was payback or as a way to try and weaken my position as a regulator. But they tried to go after my kids, and I went to one of the editors, and they agreed that it was grubby. So they're really concerned about this legislation. They see it as the first domino. And they are powerful. They've got a lot of money. They've got armies of lawyers, but they also have access to the greatest minds and very advanced technology. So it's disappointing to me that they would choose that path rather than doing what is in the realm of the possible. But yeah, it's been pretty ugly. You've got to have a fair amount of resilience to be a tech regulator. I'll tell you that much.
Well, they don't have you, and you have the parents on your side, and that's a very powerful army. So thank you very much indeed for your work. I really hope we get to talk about this. I'm going to follow it very, very closely. You've taken a lot of your time to talk to me. Thank you. I'm counting down the days, and thanks very much for coming.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Ricky.
Thanks for tuning in. The Future Media Podcast is a production of Future Media and Ricky Sutton.